Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. Good Shabbos. We are so excited that it's Friday. Shabbos is coming in tonight. We're getting ready. We're going to have a beautiful teaching today. How are you? Let us light up the darkness. Who is with us as we're getting ready on Friday? That song, by the way, was Rachem, Have Mercy on Us, Lord our God, by Yaakov Shweki and a bunch of other superstar singers at an incredible concert. I'm not sure when they had it. Must have been in Tel Aviv a few years ago, but whew, that song is beautiful. We always put the name of the song and try to tag the singer when we add the topics covered at the end. After I finish the class, I go in and I can put in the name of the song, etc. for the opening song. Okay, who's with us today as we're getting ready for Shabbos? James Roth from Indianapolis, Stephen Geger from Dover, New Hampshire, Yehudit Sobel says Shabbat Shalom, Nina and Salin. Everyone, Bryna Bloomfield is back in Massachusetts. Tom Beck is with us from Philadelphia. Joy Lynn says Shabbat Shalom from New Jersey. Patrice Carter says Shabbat Shalom from St. George, Utah. Pippa Trevino says Shabbat Shalom from South Texas. Sammy McIntyre, Shabbat Shalom from Tacoma, Washington. Bill Eldridge, still in Pollard, Arkansas, where I'm hiding from the famed Arkansan heat. Arkansan? That sounds right. And humidity by staying in to study. Sammy McIntyre is with us from Tacoma, Washington. Diane Johnson says hello from Culver, Indiana. And Sodfa Sophie says, hello there from Egypt. Great to have you with us here, Sodfa. Marjorie Holler is with us from Georgia. How's everybody doing? Are you as excited as I am for Shabbos? Get your AT shirt. Good Shabbos. That's the way we greet each other. All right. We have been talking about an alleyway. An alleyway that joins several courtyards. The courtyards have homes in them. The courtyards of the homes lead into the alley. The alley leads into the public thoroughfare. We know that we can't carry in that public thoroughfare on Shabbos. This is assuming there's not been a community-wide Eruv created. We're not in that situation now. What the sages are trying to do is to create a correction just for that alleyway so that the members of the households in those courtyards that open up onto the alley, that they can carry on Shabbos. And the principal way of doing that is to put the korech, the beam, the crossbeam across the opening of the alley. It can also be accomplished with a sidepost at the opening of the alley. Either way, it's a halachic correction, right? For the purposes of staying within the law and not desecrating Shabbos, we make a correction at the opening of that alley, and then people can carry in the alley and go to each other's houses and bring stuff on Shabbos. That's what this is all about. Yesterday, we looked at the case of what if, and we know that that beam, if it's done by a crossbeam at the top of the alley, it can't be higher than 20 cubits. And we saw, well, what happens if they can't lower the beam? Whatever the situation is at that alley, the beam cannot be lowered. Well, then we raise the ground so that the distance between the ground and the crossbeam is 20 cubits or less. Now we're talking about the reverse situation where we're talking about the minimum height of that crossbeam at the opening of the alley. It has to be at least 10 handbreadths off the ground. Let's say it's a situation where for whatever reason you can't raise that crossbeam. It's fixed at that height and it's too low. So we need to have at least that 10 handbreadths distance, 10 tefachim. So how are we going to do that? Just as before, we would elevate the ground so that it would come within 20 cubits of the crossbeam. Now we're going to dig out the ground so that there's going to be that minimum distance of 10 tefachim, 10 handbreadths between that crossbeam that defines the opening of the alley, turning it into a halachic opening like a doorway, so that's going to make that domain within the alleyway permitted for carrying on Shabbos. So we're going to hollow out the ground. We saw yesterday that if we're raising the ground, how wide, in other words, how deep into the alley does that elevated ground have to be? And we saw it only had to be 1 handbreadth wide. So it's sort of like a curb that people are going to step over. Why? Because people look down, just as people don't look up, they do look down. And a curb right at the mouth of the alley is something they're certainly going to notice. They might even stub their toe on it. So 1 handbreadth is enough. But when we're talking about hollowing out the ground, now it's a different situation. 1 handbreadth is not going to cut it. Like, we're not going to just dig a tiny little 1 handbreadth wide ditch at the opening of the alley underneath that low crossbeam to permit carrying in the rest of the alley. The choices, as we're going to see, are either going to be that the hollowed out portion of the ground of the alley has to extend into the alley. Rav Yosef says 4 handbreadths, and Abaye says 4 cubits. So the question is, what is between them? What is it that they're disagreeing on? Why does Rav Yosef say that 4 handbreadths is enough? Why does Abaye say that we need at least 4 cubits of an alley that is going to have that requisite height under the crossbeam by digging down? Why do we extend 4 cubits into the alley? All right, let's get into that question. Just checking my notes here, make sure I'm going to get it right. Okay, so to understand what is between Abaye and Rav Yosef, they are going to look at another teaching with respect to an alley that at first seems unrelated. We've been talking about the opening of the alley onto the public thoroughfare. Now we're going to talk about a breach in the walls to the side of the alley. There's a little illustration here in the Talmud, so hopefully you can see this. Let me see. All right. So it's all reversed on me and I can't see, but see right there, the alley leads down to the street. This is all reversed. That's why I can't see it. But it leads down to the street. And you see there's an opening in the side wall near the street, right? So it's an alleyway that leads out to the street. And now we're going to talk about there's a breach, a break in the wall. Some of the wall has collapsed in one of the sides of the alley. Okay, so that's the case that we're talking about. Now, part of the wall in the side of the alley has collapsed. What we're going to look at is what didn't collapse, the part of the walls that are still standing. So we're going to see is there's a breach in the side. So the first question is there enough wall between the end of the alley and the breach? How much wall do we need? Excuse me. So if 4 handbreadths of that wall remain, if 4 tefachim, right? So Rav Yosef was talking about 4 handbreadths extending into the alley. If 4 handbreadths of that wall remain at the end of the alley, then the breach doesn't change the status of the alley. So that amount of wall which is near the end of the alley, near that opening of the alley, which we're going to put the crossbeam over the opening or a side post in one of the sides of that opening onto the public thoroughfare. So now we're talking about the side walls going into the alley, but part of the side wall collapsed. So the part that didn't collapse, that's still standing near the public thoroughfare, how much of it is left? If it's at least 4 handbreadths of wall that are still there, then this is still an alley. It's defined by its opening. If there's a crossbeam there, or if there's a side post there, then this is still an alley, and carrying is permitted in that alley thanks to the correction we made at the opening of the alley with the crossbeam or the side post. But if less than 4 handbreadths of wall remain at that opening, so now we have a problem. Okay, if we have a problem, because then it's like the opening doesn't really exist anymore. The opening has been sort of deformed because part of that wall, which was the side wall of the opening, so much of it has, had collapsed in the breach or has eroded that what the cross beam is over is not deemed significant anymore. So now that part of the wall is gone, the question is, well, the side wall that didn't collapse, if it's close enough, if it's within 3 handbreadths of the opening of the public thoroughfare, right? If the wall that's still standing reaches almost to where it was before, and it's just 3 handbreadths short, okay, well, that wall is considered to reach the public thoroughfare. And this is the concept of lavud, extending. It's an imaginary extension, but basically the rabbis have a principle that if 2 walls come within 3 handbreadths of each other, it's as if that opening isn't there. It's as if the wall reaches the front. And so we can think of, hypothetically, legalistically speaking, that the side walls reach the public thoroughfare and this alley is still valid. It's still valid to carry in there. But if the breach is such that the breach happened at the end of the wall near the thoroughfare, and the wall that's still standing along the side doesn't come within 3 handbreadths, it doesn't reach the end of the alley, so now it's like the breach happened at the end of the alley, it collapsed, this is no longer an alley that we can carry in. So we're going to have to make a correction. In other words, we're going to have to build up that side wall so that it's fixed and it becomes an alley again. So the Gemara says Abaye seems to reject this teaching of Rabbi Ami, because Rabbi Ami was saying that if it's within, if the breach, if there's at least 4 handbreadths of wall still standing near the end of the alley, then that's good enough. We've defined an alley, and even if the breach is actually quite large, even 10 cubits wide, that this alley is still an alley. Abaye seems to reject that. He's the one that said, in terms of hollowing out under the crossbeam that's too low, we have to hollow out the ground of the alley 4 cubits into the alley, not 4 handbreadths, like Rav Yosef said. So he seems to be rejecting this teaching of Rabbi Ami with respect to the sides of the wall, and when do we have a legitimate alley, and when do we not. So now Abaye is going to define, well, what is an alleyway? He's going to say that the issue here is not what you're talking about. It has nothing to do with Rabbi Ami's teaching. Why? Because in the case of Rabbi Ami, that Rabbi Ami is talking about, there was a valid alley, and some of the side wall fell down. Either some of it fell down deep into the alley, somewhere along the alley, well inside the alley, in which case there really wasn't a problem, or some of the side wall fell down near the opening of the alley, and if too much of it fell down and right at the opening, that's going to invalidate the alley as an alley. But at least it was a legitimate alley for carrying at one point, and then there was this collapse in the side wall. But with respect to our case, where the crossbeam is very low and we need to hollow out the ground, it was never legitimate for carrying, and so the metaphor is not going to work. The analogy is not going to work. We can't learn out from the case of the collapsed sidewall how much ground we have to dig out in the case of the low crossbeam. So from where does Abaye get his definition that we have to go 4 cubits into the alley in order to render this alley a place where we can carry? He gets it from the definition of an alley itself. Now, we've been talking about alleys since the beginning of the tractate. I mean, we're on page 5. I haven't said that. We're on Daf Hey. This is page 5 of tractate Eruvin, the 3rd volume of the Talmud. That's where we're holding. And we've been talking about alleys since the beginning, but we didn't define what an alley is. We just said in order to correct an alley where we can't carry, so that we can carry, put that crossbeam or the sidepost at the opening to the public thoroughfare. Now, Abaye is going to define an alley. So, what is an alley according to Abaye? An alley is it's an alley, but in order to be considered an alley, legally speaking, by the sages, it also has to have at least 2 courtyards opening into it. Why 2? Because the definition is courtyards, plural. Whenever a word is pluralized in scripture or in rabbinic literature, it means that we have a minimum of 2. It makes sense. If it was 1, it would be singular. If it's plural, it has to be 2 or more. So 2 or more courtyards have to open up into our alley. Additionally, the courtyards that open into the alley have to have at least 2 houses in each courtyard, right? So there has to be at least 4 houses that are gonna make use of this alley as their route to get out to the public thoroughfare. And that is why, to begin with, the rabbis were going to prohibit carrying in this alley, because there's at least 4 different families that are going to use this alley to go out into the public thoroughfare. And because there's all of those people, and maybe many more houses can open into this alley, it has that feeling of a public thoroughfare. It's not the real public thoroughfare, but enough people are using it that they would worry that if people just carried there on Shabbos without thinking through that this is actually a semi-private domain, and we're going to render it permissible to carry there by making a conspicuous marker at the end of the alley. At any rate, we have to have at least 2 courtyards, and each courtyard has to have at least 2 houses in it. That's the definition of an alley. Says Abaye, now that you understand that, how can you have an alley in the space of just 4 handbreadths? You're going to need at least 4 cubits of depth into that alley so that these courtyards can open into the alley and allow people from multiple homes out of each courtyard to pass through this area. And that's where he's getting, you're going to need at least 4 cubits. 4 handbreadths is not going to cut it. Also, Rav Nachman taught us, says Abaye, that an alley has to be longer than it is wide. That's part of the definition of an alley. So again, it's got to be at least 4 cubits deep into that alley for it to be an alley, for it to be like an alley, for it to have the definition of an alley. And then, so if we hollow out the ground under the crossbeam to get that minimum 10 handbreadths height, that's going to permit carrying in the rest of the alley as long as the part that we've hollowed out has defined an alley. Without that, it just isn't an alley. And that is the halacha, it's according to Abaye, in the way that we dig out. Okay. Now we come to a different case. We're going to talk about the sidepost. So we've said we can make an adjustment to that alley to permit carrying there on Shabbos by putting a cross beam, over the opening of the alley where it meets the public thoroughfare. By the way, a lot of this stuff, like when you hear it, it just sounds like, oh man, that's so structural. It's too much like construction. I'm not a visual person. I can't picture everything that you're saying, Sal. So don't worry about it, because this is one area of the Talmud where we're not going to go so fast through a topic. We keep repeating ourselves. I keep repeating myself and adding nuances each time. So if you don't get it right away, don't worry about it. Just keep listening and it'll come in. Okay, so now we said we can make the alteration at the opening of the alley to the street with the crossbeam above or with the side post to the side. That's per the opinion of Beis Hillel, the followers of Hillel. You don't need both a side post and a crossbeam. One or the other will do. Okay, let's say that we're using a side post rather than to the side rather than a crossbeam above. Okay, now let's talk about the side post. What if the side post isn't just a post? And by the way, how high does a side post need to be? 10 handbreadths. It has to be at least 10 handbreadths high. That's what's going to make it conspicuous enough for it to be a marker and to be suggestive of a partition here at the opening of the alley. But now we're going to talk about how wide should it be. How wide? So it's got to be at least 1 handbreadth wide. We know that. That's not what we're discussing now. Now the question is, what if it's very wide? What if it's not just 1 handbreadth wide or 4 handbreadths wide? What if it's 4 cubits wide? Now, this doesn't feel like a post at all. 4 cubits is 6 feet, right? So now what we're talking about is boards that are arranged at the opening of the alley, and they resemble more of a protrusion. So see if you can see that. There's our alley, and then there's this, this like little partition made of boards that extends into the opening of the alley. Okay, now we got no problem here with a minimum measure for the side post. It's tall enough, it's wide enough. We're far exceeding the minimum measure of this side post. So the question is there a maximum? Can the side post be too big? That's going to be the question that we're dealing with now. And it turns out, yeah, if it extends more than 4 cubits into the opening, so then why would anybody who was putting a side post, into the edge of the alley, at the opening of the alley into the public thoroughfare, why would they make something 6 feet wide if it was just meant to be a halachic marker, a legal marker, a conspicuous legal marker, so that people would realize they're permitted to carry in that alley on Shabbos? The answer is you wouldn't. This was built for some other reason. People put those boards up maybe for privacy, maybe for structural reason, for construction. Now this reminds us of the question that one of the members of the community asked a few days ago is, can you use existing structures to create an Eruv, this kind of Eruv for carrying in an alley, or a community Eruv where we're going to surround many blocks of a community so that people can carry in there? And the answer is yes, we can use existing structures as long as they work, legalistically speaking. This one is so wide that it creates a new problem. Like, this is not anymore a conspicuous marker for the purpose of carrying in the alley. Now it sort of creates a different impression. It's just like, well, somebody put up some kind of a fence there. It's probably going to be covered in posters and advertisings and who knows what it's really there, but it's not going to make people think that this was put up by the community members so that they could carry on Shabbos. It's some other reason. So in that situation where it extends more than 4 cubits from the side of the alley across the opening of the alley, separating between the alley and the public thoroughfare, if it extends more than 4 cubits, we're actually going to need another side post, just a post. Where are we going to put that post? We're going to put it either on the other side of the alley where it's just a post and like, oh, okay, somebody put a post here. That post has no other reason than to signal to us that we can carry in this alley. Or you can even put it at the end of this 4 cubit or more wide partition, as long as it's a different height than the partition. Again, why? So that it's noticeable, so that it is conspicuous, right? Now we need this additional post so that we understand, okay, the post is there to signal to us that we can carry in that place on Shabbos. Now what's interesting is, and this is brought down by Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, okay, this analysis is provided that if this partition, which is 4 cubits or more wide, is extending into an opening that is at least 8 cubits or more wide. Why? Because if it's less than 8, meaning that this partition, this wall, right, this wood wall, this less sturdy wall than the sides of the alley that somebody built across the opening of the alley, if it's extending more than halfway across the opening of the alley, okay, well, now we've got a different situation. Now we're not looking at a sidepost, which was created to signal to us as a conspicuous marker that we can carry in that alley. Now we're looking at something that's not an alley at all. Now we're looking at a courtyard. Why? Because if it's only, say, 7 cubits wide at the opening, and more than half of it, more than, let's say, 4 cubits, is this wall made out of wooden boards. So now it was a 3-sided alley before, and now the 4th side is mostly closed. More than half of it has become enclosed. So now we can carry in that space, not because it's an alleyway that's been corrected, but rather because it's a private domain separated from the public thoroughfare by partitions all around. Get it? It's a new theory. So if it's less than the 4 cubits, or if it's less than half, it's going to work. If it's less than half and it's a bigger opening, so that's why it's less than half, even if it's 4 or 5 cubits or more wide. So we're going to have to add the additional post in order to carry there. But if it's a 7 cubit wide opening total and more than half of it is the boards, so now this is no longer an alley, it's a courtyard. And this brings us to a very Talmudic question. What if the opening of the alley is 8 cubits and this side post / wall is exactly 4 cubits wide? In other words, the opening out to the public thoroughfare is half open and half closed, right? Half open and half closed. What do we do then? Says Rav Ashi, and we're going to talk about Rav Ashi in a minute, and this is why the title of today's class is Alley This, Alley That. Who wrote the Talmud anyway? Rav Ashi put the Talmud together. He didn't write everything in the Talmud, but he, along with Ravina, his partner, was the editor of the Talmud. He's a 6th generation Amora working in Bavel, in Babylonia. And it was Rav Ashi who is the editor and who decided what got included and what didn't get included in the Gemara, in the commentary on the Mishna. So when Rav Ashi speaks, our ears perk up. What does Rav Ashi say about this question that if the alley is half open and half closed, exactly half? He says, then we don't know. We have a suffix, we have a doubt, we have an uncertainty. We're not sure. What situation is this? Do we need a correction or can we just walk there? We know that if it covers more than half, we can carry in there because it's a courtyard, not an alley. If it's less than half, so then it's less than a 4 cubit side post, so we can carry there. It works as a side post. If it's exactly 4 cubits wide and it's sitting at the side of an 8 cubit wide alley, we don't know. And because we don't know, because we have an uncertainty, we can carry. Why? Because the prohibition on carrying in that alley is a rabbinic prohibition, not a Torah prohibition. So says Rav Ashi, when we have a rabbinic prohibition and we have a case of uncertainty, we will rule leniently because the prohibition itself was imposed by the rabbis to protect us from coming to violate a Torah prohibition. In the situation where we have an uncertainty whether a biblical, a Torah prohibition is going to be violated, then we rule stringently to protect people from coming to violate the Torah prohibition. But in a case of a rabbinic prohibition, we're lenient because we don't layer prohibitions on top of prohibitions. We just have one fence around the Torah, not multiple fences around the Torah. So who was Rav Ashi that we should listen so closely to him? Who was it? Shmuel. Well, Shmuel said that Rav Ashi was destined to put the Talmud together. And I forget who said it, but the saying was, let me get this in front of me. Yeah, here it is. The Talmud says, Yeah, the Talmud says. So I'm not sure whose voice this actually is. And this is from the beautiful art scroll Introduction to the Talmud, which has biographies of all the major sages who speak in the Talmud. And about Rav Ashi, the Talmud states, from the days of Moshe, from the days of Moses, until Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is the one who edited and put together the Mishna around the year 200 of the Common Era, we do not find Torah and authority in one place, and similarly, from the days of Rebbe until Rav Ashi, we do not find Torah and authority in one place. You can find that quote at Sanhedrin 36a. So, meaning we don't have a sage whose Torah is so great, whose wisdom is so great, and who has the authority and the respect of everyone around him, both together in one person. We only find that 3 times in history. We find it with Moses, we find it with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was working in the land of Israel around the year 200, and we have it with Rav Ashi, who's working in Babylonia in the 6th century. So Rav Ashi was a student of Rava in his youth, but Rava died when he was about 15. And when Rava died, who was the preeminent scholar of his generation, his students sort of scattered into the various learning centers of Bavel, of Babylonia, places like Pumbedisa, Nehardea, and Sura. And they were teaching their students, and there was a lot of conflicting information even among these sages from one locality to another. Rav Ashi had all the conditions. As the art scroll Introduction to the Talmud says, Rava was the preeminent sage of his time, and after his death, his students scattered to the different towns, each studying and teaching Torah in his local yeshiva, Sura, Pumbedisa, Nehardea, Narash, etc. Eventually, Rav Ashi realized the time had come to organize the entire body of Talmudic literature into one text, arranged according to each tractate, each masechta. All the tools necessary for this formidable task were at his disposal, right? No one else had all these tools in one place before. What were the tools? He was wealthy and influential. So he had time, and he didn't have to answer to a boss. He had time. He had received his Torah training from all the leaders of the generation, Rava and his students. He enjoyed a close relationship with the Reish Galusa, meaning the exilarch, the head of the Jewish community. So meaning that the head of the Jewish community, who's a sage himself, would respect the rulings of Rav Ashi. The exilarch said, no, I get it. You are the chief rabbi. You are the preeminent scholar of our generation. I may have political authority over our people, but your rulings are the most authoritative rulings. And that was the humble and beautiful respect that he earned from the Reish Galusa, Rav Huna bar Nassan. And Rav Ashi even had a close working relationship with the king of Persia. Remember, we're talking about Bavel, we're talking about Babylonia, but Babylonia in this period is under the authority of Persia. And the Persian king at this point was King Yazdegerd I. And lastly, of all the tools that were available to Rav Ashi at this period, there was peace in the land, right? So people could travel freely, and they could do this monumental task of arranging all of these teachings that the rabbis had been working out in their commentary on the Mishnah for the previous 300 to 400 years, and get it all into one place. And so it's Rav Ashi who is going to write the Gemara, and the Gemara plus the Mishnah is the Talmud. Rav Ashi, along with his partner Ravina, but it's Rav Ashi who comes first, gets the credit for being the editor and putting together the Talmud. Okay? And Shmuel had even predicted that this. He wrote, so the great Amora Shmuel was shown the book of Adam, the first man, which listed the leaders and sages of all the subsequent generations, and in it was written, Rav Ashi and Ravina will be the end of the period of rulings, i.e., the last of the Amoraim, who would arrange all the Talmudic judgments and conclusions until their time into its present form. That teaching is found in Masechta Bava Metzia at page 86a. That is why Rav Ashi is so authoritative, and when Rav Ashi speaks, we listen very closely. That's what I've got for us today. Let's go to your comments and questions. Okay, Bill Eldridge says, notwithstanding that one does not need both post and crossbeam, can the families who use and set up the alley choose to use both if it would be more aesthetically pleasing and it still be valid? Yes, you don't need both a post and crossbeam, but you certainly are allowed to use both. This is not a case where too much will invalidate. We're not exceeding the maximum here. And in fact, this would seem like a good idea, right? First of all, according to Beis Shammai, you need both a side post and a crossbeam above. It's according to Beis Hillel that we don't, and we follow Hillel. But since this is going to just be left to sit there for a long time, and it should last a long time, and people may not think about it, as we discussed, because all these people are communally responsible for it, we have the danger, right, of the tragedy of the commons, that a pot owned by partners is neither hot nor cold. So having both the side post and the crossbeam above may help ensure that if one of those structures fails, the other one will still be there and no one will come to transgress Shabbos unwittingly. Lynn in Texas says, I appreciate your background info on the biographies of these authors. The Art Scroll intro to the Talmud is great to have. I see mine on the shelf, but who can read it all? Thanks again. Okay, beautiful. That seems to be all the questions that we've got. I'm not seeing another that Nina is sending to me. Okay, so I think maybe the last thing to say, what is our takeaway today, right? It's that we identify, right? They identified a problem. This alley, if we allow people to carry there without the conspicuous marker, they may carry in the alley and then keep carrying when they go out to the public thoroughfare. So we're going to protect people from that. That's the purpose of this ruling. How are we going to make that conspicuous marker? That's what we've been talking about. But having established that conspicuous marker, we don't always have a choice. We can't always impose the ideal halachic correction to a potential transgression just because the architecture of an alley or the walls that exist or the people who own it or the fact that maybe there's a non-Jew who owns this whole property and he doesn't want it to be altered in that way, or the courtyards are not, not everybody is on board. So there's very often when we're trying to live a pious life that we have, imperfect situation, and we're going to have to figure out how to handle that, to do the best that we can so that we stay within the law, but we may not have the perfect fix. And if we don't have the perfect fix, we may have to modify our behavior more than we would have cared to. But it's that whole process of engaging in, okay, what is our situation? Where are the potential pitfalls that we, could stray, and how are we going to handle that, right? So I think this is really a great system of thinking for not just the religious questions in our lives, right? When we think about the ways that we can fall on, en route to our goals and our journeys in life, we got to think not only about what am I going to walk today, but where am I going to be next week? Where am I going to be next year? Am I prepared for that? And what are the failings going to be? There's just, there's this show on Netflix now. For anyone who's seen it, it's made in Spain. It's phenomenal, called Money Heist, and it's a heist picture, and it's just an action show. But what it's about is this man, the professor, who has thought through so many different pitfalls, right? That here's what I want, and not just what's compassionate or nice or good to do, but really, what are other people around me trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they thinking about? The more I think about what others are thinking and how they're likely to behave, the more natural compassion I'm going to have. And hopefully that will stir my mercy, right? My sense of mercy. Just like the song that we had at the opening, Yaakov Shweki and friends singing Rachem. Have mercy on us, God. If we want God to have mercy on us, we have to have mercy on others. And the real path to having mercy on others is not just to view them as, objects worthy of compassion, but as full-blooded people who have their own journeys that they're on. And we need to try to understand other people so that we can interact with them better and more compassionately. That's what I've got for us today. May you have a sweet, sweet, sweet Shabbos. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night after Shabbos ends. Starting Sunday, the family and I are going to be on vacation, and you're going to have 6 shows in a row with incredible guest rabbis. Rabbi Abish Rand he's second. So Rav Aaron Parry is going to go first, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then Rabbi Abish Rand will be teaching the class on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. You're going to have a ball. Okay.